My name is Paul Watson, and I was a co-founder of Greenpeace and the founder of the Sea Shepherd Conservation Society, which I left last year, and now I've established the Captain Paul Watson Foundation. And that was to advance the strategy that I came up with in 1977 for addressing conservation issues, and that's what I call aggressive nonviolence, which means that we're going to aggressively intervene, but we're not going to hurt anybody. And after 45 years, we've never caused a single injury to a single person. So I'm quite proud of that record. But we have shut down hundreds of illegal operations around the world against poachers and illegal whaling operations, that kind of thing. When I looked at the topic here to address was how do we fix a broken planet? Well, the short answer to that is we can't. We don't have to be concerned about the planet. We have to be concerned about ourselves. The planet will do quite well. There's been 5 major extinction events in the history of this planet. We're now in the midst of the 6th extinction event called the Anthropocene, and because we're responsible for it. And what that means is that between the year 2000 and the year 2065, we will lose more plants and animal species than we have lost in the last 65 million years. And we're responsible for that. Now, in 2015, I was asked to speak at the UN conference on the COP21 conference in Paris on climate change. And one of the things I noticed right off when they first started this is that nobody was talking about the ocean. It wasn't even on the agenda. So I had to get in there and get them to put it on the agenda, which they did. But unfortunately, it was primarily sponsored. The ocean agenda was primarily sponsored by the seafood industry, which really, I think, missed the point. But the question of what do we do to protect the ocean? And again, the answer is nothing. In fact, all we need to do is leave it alone. Let it recover from the damage that we've done to it. But to do nothing, of course, you have to do something. And what that means is we have to shut down industrialized, mechanized commercial fishing operations around the world. And of course, that's not going to really happen because there's too much invested in it. But that is the source of the depletion of life in our ocean, is out of control industrialized fishing. Now, since 1950, the year I was born, actually, since 1950, there's been a 40% diminishment in phytoplankton populations in the sea. For the most part, people are completely unaware of that. But you can look it up. It was in Scientific American in 2010. They had the first article on this. And a 40% diminishment of phytoplankton. And what that means is that a 40% diminishment in those species of plants, aquatic plants, that provide up to 70% of the oxygen in the air that we breathe and sequesters enormous amounts of CO2. And why is this happening? Because we're diminishing life in the ocean. We're diminishing the population of whales and dolphins and seabirds and turtles and fishes. And they are literally the farmers of phytoplankton, because what they provide are the nutrients that phytoplankton require to flourish, and that is iron and magnesium and nitrogen. And so when you reduce or diminish those species, you're diminishing the nutrient supply to the phytoplankton. 30% of our oxygen comes from trees like the Amazon jungles and whatever, but 70% comes from phytoplankton. And the reality is this: if phytoplankton disappears, we die. We don't live on this planet without phytoplankton. It is the foundation of life in the ocean. Not only is it providing oxygen, sequestering CO2, but it's also the bottom of the food pyramid for everything in the ocean, to feed the fishes, to feed the whales. And so it's a circulatory system within the sea, which has worked beautifully for millions of years until we came along and intervened. And anytime human beings intervene to try and try to even repair the problems, we usually cause another problem in that respect. But the reality of it is that every single commercial fishing industry on the planet right now is in a state of collapse. And there is no such thing as a sustainable fishery. So again, 35 to 40% of the fish that is caught isn't even caught legally. It's caught illegally, and they can't control it. There's no way to trace it. The transshipment of the fishes at seas, the poaching that takes place in areas which are supposedly supposed to be protected. In fact, these protected areas are where the poachers go because there's no enforcement. just a month and a half ago, the UN passed the Ocean Treaty, but it means nothing. It's just words on paper. Without enforcement, it means nothing. And there's a complete lack of economic and political motivation on the part of governments to actually do anything about this. The ocean outside the 200-mile limit is the Wild West, and people get to do whatever they want to do. That's why in 1977, I decided to go out and intervene, because if there is no law enforcement, then somebody had to do something. And the United Nations World Charter for Nature allows for non-government organizations, individuals, or governments to go out and uphold the laws of the sea. And specifically in areas beyond national jurisdiction, is which we've been addressing. That's why for 45 years, I've been able to intervene against illegal operations at sea, and I've never been convicted of a felony crime for doing so. In some cases, of course, it became quite controversial, like in 1986, when the International Whaling Commission passed the commercial moratorium on whaling, and Japan, Norway, and Iceland decided to just ignore that moratorium, thus violating international conservation law. So in 1986, we sank half of Iceland's whaling fleet at dockside in Reykjavik Harbor and destroyed their whale processing plant and shut them down for a number of years. Now, that might seem highly illegal, and I asked them what the charges were, and there were no response. So I flew to Reykjavik a year later and demanded to be arrested. And they brought me in for interrogation and asked, are you saying that you sunk these ships? I said, well, you know we sunk the ships. We're going to sink the other two at the first opportunity. Well, then I was escorted to the airport and deported out of the country at no charges. The Minister of Justice stood up in the Althing, the Parliament in Iceland that month, and he said, or that day, and he said, who does he think he is? He comes into our country and demands to be arrested. Get him out of here. Well, the reason being is they knew that to put me on trial would be to put themselves on trial, and they didn't want to do that. So sometimes to make a difference, you really have to go out there and take those risks. In 1979, I went after a pirate whaler called the Sierra, which had been operating with impunity for 10 years, and nobody was able to do anything about it. So I left out from the port of Boston, crossed the Atlantic, and I found it off the coast of Portugal. And I chased it into the port, and then I rammed it twice and ended its career. I was brought before the port captain in Portugal, and I was charged with gross criminal negligence. And that is until I said to the captain, there wasn't anything negligent about it. I hit that ship exactly where I intended to hit it. It was deliberate, not negligent. And he laughed and he said, well, I also can't find out who owns that ship. And until I can, you're free to go. So, you know, the career of that pirate whaler was ended. And then we shut down another pirate whaler in the Canary Islands, two more in South Africa. And we sank half of the Spanish whaling fleet in the port of Vigo, who are in violation of their quotas on fin whales. So taking it into our hands to uphold those laws. Now, that might be considered vigilantism, and probably is, but you know, when there is no law enforcement, we're the only sheriff in town, really. And the reason we can get away with what we're doing is because they get away with what they're doing. So if they can break the law, then we can appear to break the law in defense of upholding that law. It's a complicated situation. But anyway, that's what we've been doing for many years. Now, I think the real problem that the planet Earth faces is ourselves and our attitude, our philosophical understanding of who we are and what our place is on this planet. For 10,000 years, human beings have been under the illusion, which I call Anthropocentrism, this idea that everything was created for us. It's all about us. We're the only species that really matters. And, you know, all other species are irrelevant. When in fact, the reality is we're just a bunch of overly conceited naked apes who have become divine legends in our own mind. We think we're godlike, and we're not. There are three laws of ecology. The first of the law is the law of diversity, that the strength of an ecosystem is dependent upon diversity within it. The second is the law of interdependence, that species within an ecosystem are interdependent with each other. And third is the law of finite resources, that there's a limit to growth and a limit to carrying capacity. And when one species steals the carrying capacity of other species, that causes diminishment in both diversity and interdependence, and that leads to ecological collapse. Now, why I'm not that worried about it in the larger scheme of things is that we're in the sixth major extinction, but there's been 5 major extinction events in the history of this planet. The Permian extinction took out 97% of everything in the ocean, 76% of everything on land. But what do all of those major extinction events have in common? It takes 18 to 20 million years for a full recovery. So no matter what we do, 18 to 20 million years from now, this planet will still be a beautiful planet, and evolution will replace everything that we've destroyed. Well, one thing for sure, we won't be here in 18 to 20 million years ago. So really, I look on the conservation environmental movement, not as something to save the planet, but really to save ourselves from ourselves and all those other species that we would take with us into our demise, because we will destroy ourselves really through our own ecological stupidity. My life was changed on one single day in the month of June of 1975. We had come up with this idea to protect whales. And we're reading a lot of Gandhi at the time, and we felt all we had to do was put our bodies between the whales and the harpoons, and the whalers wouldn't kill them. We went out in search of the Soviet whaling fleet, which we found 65 miles off the coast of California. This was before the 200-mile limit. And Robert Hunter and I found ourselves in a small little inflatable boat in front of a Soviet harpoon vessel bearing down on us at full speed, about 20 knots. And in front of us were 8 magnificent sperm whales that were fleeing for their life. And every time the harpooner tried to take a shot, I would maneuver the boat to block that shot. And this worked for about 20 minutes until the captain on the Soviet vessel came running down the catwalk, screamed into the ear of the harpooner, looked down at us, smiled, brought his finger across his throat, and that's when I realized Gandhi wasn't going to work for us that day. And a few moments later, there's an incredible explosion. This harpoon flew over our heads, slammed into the backside of one of the whales in the pod. It was a female, and she screamed. I didn't even know whales could scream, but she screamed. There's a fountain of blood, water, and suddenly the largest whale in that pod rose up and slammed the water with his tail and dove and swam right underneath of us and threw himself at the bow of the harpoon where the harpooner was. And he was waiting for him with an unattached harpoon, knowing that he would protect his pod. And as the whale's head came up and out of the water towards that bow, he pulled the trigger and hit the whale point blank in the head with an explosive harpoon. The whale fell back in the water, thrashing in agony, blood everywhere. And as it rolled on the surface of the sea, I caught its eye. And he dove again, and now I saw a trail of bloody bubbles coming straight towards our small little boat. And he came up and out of the water at an angle, so the next move was to come down on top of us and crush us. And as his head rose up out of the sea, and I looked into that eye, an eye the size of my fist, an eye where I could see my own reflection that was that close, I saw something that changed my life. It was understanding. That whale understood what we were trying to do, because I could see the incredible effort he made to pull himself back, and instead of coming down and collapsing on top of us, he began to slide backwards into the sea. I saw his eye disappear beneath the surface, and he died. He could have killed us, but he chose not to do so. But I also saw something else in that eye, pity, not for himself, but for us, that we could take life so thoughtlessly, mercilessly. And why? Why were we killing that whale? The Russians don't eat whale meat. Nobody eats sperm whale meat, but they kill them for oil, high heat resistant oil, lubricating oil, both sperm oil and spermaceti oil. And one of the things that was the Russians very much valued about spermaceti oil is for the lubrication of intercontinental ballistic missiles. And I said to myself, here we are, destroying this incredibly intelligent, beautiful, self-aware, sentient being for the purpose of making a weapon meant for the mass extermination of human beings. And that's when it hit me. We're insane. We're ecologically insane. War is the ultimate form of insanity. And I said to myself at that time, I'm going to do everything in my life to protect them. Not us, but them. They are my clients and have been ever since. So in 1986, after we sank half of Iceland's whaling fleet, I was approached by some environmental colleagues at the International Whaling Commission. And they said, we just want to let you know that what you did in Iceland was criminal, reprehensible, unforgivable. And I said, yeah, so why do I care? And they said, aren't you concerned about how people think of you? I said, no, not at all. We didn't sink those whaling ships in Iceland for you or for the environmental movement or for any human being. We sank them for the whales. Find me a whale that disagreed with what we did that day, and I promise you we won't do it again. But that's who our clients are. And that's what we've been doing ever since. Excuse me. Anthropocentrism is basically a form of collective mass psychosis. And believing that everything was on this planet was created for us, that everything revolves around us is delusional. We've even created our own gods to answer the question of why we were created. But in fact, we're part of the biology along with everything else. We're all interdependent with all other species. A few years ago, I had a reporter, Brett Hume from the Fox network, called me up and he said, did you say at a lecture that whales and trees, bees, and worms were more important than people? I said, yeah, I did in fact say that. And he said, how could you say something so horrible? I said, well, because whales and worms and trees and bees are more important than people. And the reason being is they can live here without us. But we cannot live here without them. We need them. They don't need us. It's as simple as that. We owe our existence to phytoplankton, worms, trees, bees, whales, and all these other species. Without them, we don't exist. Without phytoplankton, the ocean dies. And if phytoplankton dies, the ocean dies, and we all die. We cannot live on this planet with a dead ocean. Which leads me to explain something which I just recently wrote a children's book about. Because people say, well, I don't live near the ocean. What's that got to do with me? The reality is you do live near the ocean. In fact, you live in the ocean. In fact, you are the ocean. And what I mean by that, what is this planet? It's a water planet. It's the ocean planet. And that means it's water in constant and continuous circulation. Sometimes it's in the sea, and sometimes it's in the clouds, and sometimes it's underground, and sometimes it's locked in ice, and sometimes it's in the cells of every living plant and animal. So the water that's in our bodies right now was once recently underground or locked in ice, or once in the body of other animals or in plants. In fact, it's been a continuous thing for so long that the glass of water that you drink today was once probably the same molecules that were drunk by a dinosaur. It's the constant continuation of that and most essential element for life, which is water. So the answer to what is the ocean is we are the ocean. This is the ocean planet. And so that means that what we do on land will impact what is done in the sea and in the atmosphere and underground. Right now, factory farming, for example, this killing of 65 to 80 billion animals every year is a major source of groundwater pollution, a major source of dead zones in the ocean, a major contributing factor to greenhouse gases being released. And it's also a major contributing factor to the release of zoonotic transmission of viruses. That's why every year we kill millions and millions of animals on factory farms to try and keep a lid on the release of viruses to other animals and to other species. When you diminish an ecosystem, when you diminish the number of species within it, you create a situation of chaos because every plant and every animal has beneficial viruses associated with it. We could not live on this planet without these viruses. But when you diminish one species, the virus associated with that species has to go somewhere. And that's called zoonotic transmission, going on to another species. And I mean, for instance, the common cold we got from horses, and we got flu from pigs and birds and things like this. And so this is going to be more and more of a problem as we diminish species and ecosystems. And added to that, of course, is the melting of the permafrost, which is releasing pathogens which have been locked up for tens of thousands of years. I mean, in 2017, we had an outbreak of anthrax in Siberia, or excuse me, northern Finland, which killed over 1,000 reindeer and killed one human being. And that was because of a reindeer body that was frozen and then unfrozen and released the spores for that reason. That's going to be more and more of an oncoming problem. In Laurie Garrett's book, published in 1995, called The Coming Plague, she predicted a lot of this happening. And what we've seen over the years since is, West Nile virus, Zika virus, Ebola, all of these are zoonotic transmitted viruses. And we're also seeing it in other species. Factory farming or salmon, like on salmon farms, in aquatic salmon farms, are passing viruses from themselves to indigenous salmon species, say in British Columbia. What you have here is you're taking an exotic predator, the Atlantic salmon, which does not belong in the Pacific, putting it into a Pacific ecosystem in a concentrated form where it becomes very, attracts disease. And to address that, they use a lot of antibiotics and a lot of chemicals to keep that in balance. But the disease then will move to indigenous populations. And the other problem is, of course, sea lice, which are built up in the salmon farms. And as the fingerlings come down from the wild salmon populations, fingerlings transfer to these young salmon and kill them. So because of domestic salmon farms, there's been quite a diminishment in indigenous fish populations, salmon populations especially. Now, the other problem is that the chemicals that they use sink to the bottom, killing invertebrates and crustaceans, other creatures. So it's a very, very unhealthy system. And quite frankly, I don't understand why we allow it. If I were to take a piranha or a couple of piranhas and stick them into a lake in the southern United States and say, go on and breed, that would be criminal. I would be arrested for that. But why would we allow an Atlantic predator to be introduced into an ecosystem that doesn't belong for no other reason than it's $1 billion industry? And so these are the things that we're causing problems with all along going through it. Another way, I think, to put this in perspective is to look at the planet for what it is. We are a spaceship, and we're on this incredible voyage around the Milky Way galaxy. It takes 250 million years just to make one revolution of the galaxy. And that spaceship has a life support system, provides us the air we breathe and sequesters CO2 and regulates climate and temperature and provides the food that we eat. And that life support system is run by a crew of engineers, and not us. We human beings, we're passengers. We're having a wonderful time amusing ourselves, entertaining ourselves, but we're not engineers. The engineers are the bacterium and the worms and the bees and the trees and the other creatures that we are dependent upon. But what we are doing is we're murdering them. We're killing them off. And there's only so many engineers you can kill before that life support system begins to may not be maintained, begins to fall apart. And if that falls apart, of course, that life support system will directly affect our ability to survive on this planet. We need those bees out there. We need those worms in the ground. We need those whales providing the nutrient base for phytoplankton. We can no longer pretend that we're the only species that really matters. And it's going to be very difficult because anthropocentric attitudes are so ingrained into our very being for the last 10,000 years. And how do you recover that? Anthropocentrism is also responsible for all of the wars that we have engaged in for thousands of years. Wars over territory, wars over religion, and that wars over this understanding that not only are we the only thing in nature to be valued, but our particular tribes are more important than all other tribes. And so biocentrism as an attitude actually removes the need for war, racism, misogyny, and so many other ills that impact us. Because what biocentrism means is the understanding we're part of everything, that we're part of this whole, not superior, not inferior, but part of. And if we learn to live in harmony with all other species, and that means we learn to live in harmony with ourselves, then I think that that is a real path to going forward. But it's a difficult path to follow because we don't want to let go of these collective mass psychosis things which people call religion. Just even mentioning that is bound to upset a lot of people. But all dominant religions on this planet are anthropocentric based, all putting us at the center. Indigenous populations around the world have more biocentric religious points of view, where they understand that link between us and all these other species. But the anthropocentric religions completely isolate all the other species out of the equation.